I used to think betrayal had a sound, something sharp and unmistakable like glass breaking in the middle of the night, but the truth is it sounds more like laughter drifting from another room, low and familiar. The kind you don't question because it belongs to people you trust. And that's how it began for me, not with suspicion but with routine. Every Thursday night like clockwork. The same table, the same cards, the same group of men who had known each other long enough to stop pretending, and among them was Aaron, my best friend since college. The kind of friend who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had toasted to my happiness with a glass raised high, who had looked me in the eye and promised that some things never change. And for a long time, I believed that was true. My wife Lena used to tease us about those poker nights, calling them our escape from adulthood, and she would bring us drinks sometimes, lingering just long enough to roll her eyes at our arguments over hands and bets. Her presence warm and easy, part of the life I thought was solid, predictable, safe. And I never once questioned the way Aaron's gaze sometimes followed her, a second too long, or the way her smile shifted slightly when she spoke to him. Because trust makes you blind in the most comfortable way, it edits reality into something easier to accept. The first crack appeared so quietly, I almost missed it. A message on Lena's phone lighting up while she was in the shower, Aaron's name glowing on the screen, and I remember pausing, just for a second, staring at it without touching, because there was nothing unusual about them knowing each other, nothing strange about a message, and yet something in me hesitated. Something small and uneasy, but I ignored it because suspicion without proof feels like disloyalty, and I had always been loyal, to my friend, to my wife, to the life we had built together. Weeks passed, poker nights continued, and if anything, they felt even more normal, almost exaggeratedly so. Laughter, louder, conversations easier, as if something unseen was being carefully maintained beneath the surface, and Lena began to linger less in the room, saying she had work to do or calls to take, disappearing down the hallway while we played, and I never thought twice about it because why would I? Everything looked exactly as it always had. It wasn't until one night, when Aaron folded early and excused himself to take a call, that something shifted again, because he stepped outside, not into the front yard where calls were usually taken, but toward the back of the house, toward the sliding door that led to the dimly lit patio, and I don't know what made me follow, maybe instinct, maybe coincidence, maybe something inside me finally choosing to pay attention, but I stood just inside the doorway, unseen, and heard Lena's voice before I saw her, soft and close, too close. And the silence that followed her words was not empty but full, heavy with something I couldn't yet name. I didn't step outside then, didn't confront them, didn't even breathe too loudly, because some part of me already understood that once seen, certain things cannot be unseen. And I wasn't ready yet to lose the life I believed in, even if that belief was already beginning to fracture. Instead, I returned to the table, sat down, and picked up my cards with steady hands, even as my mind raced. Even as something deep inside me whispered that the routine I trusted was no longer what it seemed, that the laughter, the friendship, the marriage, all of it might be something else entirely, something hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to finally see it. And as the night went on, as Aaron returned and Lena reappeared as if nothing had happened, I realized that whatever was unfolding between them had not just begun, it had been happening quietly, carefully, right in front of me, woven into the very nights I had always believed were mine. After that night, nothing looked different, and yet everything did, like a picture hung slightly crooked that you suddenly can't stop noticing. And I began to see patterns where before there had only been habit, small things at first, the way Lena would check her phone more often on Thursdays, the way Aaron started arriving earlier than the others, always with some casual excuse, always with that same easy smile that now felt rehearsed. And I told myself I was imagining it, that I was letting one strange moment distort years of trust, but doubt, once planted, doesn't need much to grow. I didn't confront either of them, not yet, because confrontation demands certainty, and all I had were fragments, glances, pauses that lasted a second too long, and instead I watched, quietly, carefully, the way someone watches a storm forming on the horizon, unsure if it will pass or break everything apart. One Thursday, I pretended to forget my wallet upstairs just as the game was starting, a small lie that felt heavier than it should have, and I walked down the hallway slowly, deliberately, listening. And I heard nothing at first, just the quiet hum of the house. But then, from the kitchen, a whisper, low and urgent, and I stopped just before turning the corner, my pulse loud in my ears. And I heard Lena laugh softly, not the open laugh she used with me, but something quieter, more intimate, followed by Aaron's voice, equally low, and I didn't catch the words, only the tone, the familiarity of it, the closeness that didn't belong to friendship. I stepped into the kitchen then, forcing the moment into the open, and they both turned toward me too quickly, like actors missing a cue, and Lena smiled, that same warm, practiced smile, asking if I found my wallet, and Aaron reached for a drink, avoiding my eyes for just a fraction too long. And in that fraction, something inside me settled. Not relief, not anger, but a cold, steady understanding that whatever was happening between them was real, and worse, it was comfortable, practiced, something they had done before. The rest of the night passed in a blur of cards and conversation I barely followed. My attention split between the game and the invisible thread, connecting the two of them. Every glance, every subtle shift, every moment they avoided looking at each other when I was watching, and looked too naturally when I wasn't. And I realized then that betrayal is not a single act, but a series of choices, repeated quietly until they become routine. When the night ended and the others left, Aaron lingered as he often did, standing by the door, talking about nothing in particular, and I watched him closely, wondering if he felt any guilt, any hesitation, but his expression was calm, almost relaxed, as if he had already convinced himself that whatever he was doing wasn't wrong, and that angered me more than anything. Not the possibility of betrayal, but the ease of it. After he left, Lena moved through the house like nothing had changed, tidying up, asking if I wanted tea, her voice steady, normal, and I studied her face, searching for something, anything that would confirm what I now believed, but she gave me nothing, and I realized how well I knew her, and how little I understood her at the same time. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I felt the distance between us more sharply than ever, not physical distance but something deeper. Something that had been quietly growing while I trusted everything was fine, and I understood then that the truth was already there, waiting. I just had to decide whether I was ready to see it completely, because once I did, there would be no going back to the version of my life I had believed in for so long. I didn't plan to catch them, not in any dramatic, calculated way, because part of me still hoped I was wrong. Still clung to the possibility that all the signs I had been collecting would somehow rearrange themselves into something innocent, something explainable, but truth doesn't bend to hope. And it revealed itself on an ordinary night that began like all the others, with cards shuffled, drinks poured, laughter echoing through the room like nothing had ever been broken. I remember watching Aaron more than the game that night, the way he leaned back in his chair too comfortably, the way his eyes flicked toward the hallway when Lena disappeared, and I felt it then, that quiet pull again. That instinct telling me something was happening just out of sight, and this time, I didn't ignore it. I waited a few minutes, just long enough to make my absence seem natural, then stood up, muttering something about needing the restroom, and walked down the hallway with a calm I didn't feel, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the bedroom door, slightly ajar, and I knew before I even touched it that whatever was on the other side would change everything. I pushed it open slowly, not with force, but with certainty, and the world didn't explode or shatter the way I had once imagined betrayal would. It simply stopped, like a breath held too long, and there they were, Lena and Aaron too close, undeniably close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Their expressions frozen between surprise and something else, something that looked almost like guilt, but not quite enough to matter. No one spoke at first, and in that silence, everything became clear. Not just what I was seeing in that moment, but all the moments that had led to it, the messages, the whispers, the glances, the routine carefully constructed around my trust, and I realized that this wasn't new, it wasn't a mistake, it was something that had been unfolding for a long time, hidden in plain sight while I sat just a few rooms away believing in something that no longer existed. Lena said my name first, softly, as if gentleness could undo what I had already seen, and Aaron stepped back, running a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes again, and that small, familiar gesture, the same one I had ignored before, struck me harder than anything else, because it confirmed that I had been right to notice, right to question, wrong only in how long I had chosen not to act. I expected anger to take over, expected shouting, accusations, something loud and undeniable, but what came instead was a strange, quiet clarity, the kind that settles in when there is nothing left to doubt. And I found myself standing there, looking at the two people I had trusted most in the world, and feeling not explosive rage, but a deep, steady sense of finality, as if something inside me had already ended. "How long?" I asked, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me, and they exchanged a glance, a quick, silent conversation that told me more than any words could. And Lena answered, hesitating just enough to make the truth obvious. "It's not what you think," which is what people say when it is exactly what you think. And I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because the script was so predictable, so familiar, and yet it had taken me this long to reach this point. Aaron finally spoke, stepping forward as if proximity might somehow repair what he had broken, saying my name like it still belonged to him, like our years of friendship could shield him from what he had done. But I held up my hand, stopping him, because I realized I didn't need explanations. Explanations were just another way of softening reality, and reality was already clear enough. I turned and walked out of the room, back down the hallway past the table where the cards still lay scattered, past the glasses half full, past the life I had been living just minutes before, and I heard them behind me, calling my name, footsteps hesitant, unsure, but I didn't stop, because stopping would mean engaging, and engaging would mean giving them space to rewrite the moment, and I was done with rewritten versions of the truth. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the sound of the door closing behind me, louder than anything that had happened inside, and for the first time since this had all begun, I allowed myself to feel it fully, not just the betrayal, but the weight of everything I had ignored, everything I had trusted without question. And I understood then that catching them was not the end of something sudden. It was the confirmation of something that had been ending for a long time, and now that it was finally undeniable, there was only one question left, not what they had done, but what I was going to do next. I didn't go back inside that night, not to finish the game, not to hear their explanations, not to give them the chance to reshape what I had already seen into something easier to forgive. Because forgiveness requires honesty, and what they had built between them was layered in secrecy, and I understood, standing there in the quiet dark, that whatever came next had to begin with truth. Not theirs, but mine. I drove without a destination at first, the city passing in blurred lights and empty streets. And with every mile, the shock settled into something steadier, something colder but clearer. And I realized I had a choice. Not about what had happened, because that was already done, but about how much of myself I was willing to lose in response to it. Revenge came to mind, of course, the immediate, instinctive urge to expose them in the most painful way possible, to tear apart their carefully hidden secret, the way it had torn through my life. And I imagined it briefly. The confrontation, the fallout, the satisfaction that people always promise comes with making others hurt the way you've been hurt. But even in that imagining, something felt hollow, temporary, like striking a match in a storm, bright for a moment, and then gone, leaving nothing changed beneath it. Walking away felt different, not easier, not softer, but heavier in a way that demanded strength rather than reaction. And I began to understand that leaving was not surrender, it was refusal. Refusal to stay in a story that had already rewritten itself without me. By the time the sun began to rise, pale and distant on the horizon, I knew what I was going to do, not because it was simple, but because it was the only choice that felt like it still belonged to me. When I returned home, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that follows something irreversible, and they were both there, sitting in the living room like they had been waiting. Lena's eyes red, Aaron rigid and uneasy, and for a moment I saw them not as villains, but as people who had made choices they could no longer undo, and strangely, that made everything feel even more final. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse, didn't ask for explanations, because explanations would only circle back to the same truth I already understood, and instead I spoke simply, clearly, telling Lena I was leaving, telling Aaron that whatever we had been as friends no longer existed, and the words felt solid as they left me, not fueled by anger, but anchored in certainty. Lena tried to speak, tried to reach for me, her voice breaking in a way that might have mattered once, but I stepped back, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, because distance was the only thing left that I could control, and I realized then that closure doesn't come from long conversations or perfect endings. It comes from knowing when something is over and refusing to pretend otherwise. The days that followed were not dramatic, not filled with confrontation or spectacle, but quiet and deliberate. The process of separating lives that had once been intertwined, dividing spaces, dividing routines, dividing the future from the past. And there were moments when the weight of it all hit me unexpectedly, when a memory would surface, something small and ordinary, and I would feel the loss of not just what had been broken, but what I had believed it was, and I allowed myself to feel that, because denying it would only extend its hold on me. I didn't expose them publicly, didn't turn their betrayal into something for others to witness, because I came to understand that not every truth needs an audience to be real, and what mattered was not how others saw what had happened, but how I chose to move forward from it. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, my life began to take shape again. Different, quieter, but undeniably mine, and I found that trust, once broken, doesn't disappear completely, it changes form, becoming something more cautious, more deliberate, something that begins with trusting yourself before anyone else. The last time I saw Lena was when we finalized everything. A brief meeting, practical and restrained, and she looked at me as if searching for something, forgiveness maybe, or anger. Something that would make sense of how it had all ended, but I had neither left to give, only acceptance, and I realized that sometimes the most honest ending is not loud or emotional, but simply the absence of what used to be. As for Aaron, he became a memory I no longer revisited, not because it didn't matter, but because holding on to it would have meant carrying a version of myself I had already outgrown. In the end, what stayed with me wasn't the moment I caught them or the betrayal itself, but the decision that followed, the choice to walk away without becoming something I didn't want to be. And I understood then that losing them was not the same as losing everything, because what remained, what I reclaimed in the process, was something I had almost forgotten how to recognize. Something steady and unshaken beneath everything else, myself.